The valley opened wide and empty. From the ridge above, it looked familiar, a long basin shaped by ancient water, bordered by low hills, and cut through by a seasonal stream that no longer moved. It was the kind of place that had held animals for generations, not because it was generous, but because it was predictable. The bison descended into it anyway. He moved alone, heavy head low, shoulders rising above his spine in a broad, muscular arc. Each step pressed deep into the soil, leaving prints that lasted longer here than anywhere else. The valley accepted weight. It always had. But it did not accept grazing. The grass was still gone. What remained lay cropped close to the ground, brittle and pale, broken into short stubble that carried little nourishment. Patches of bare earth showed through where hooves had churned during earlier weeks, when herds arrived before the valley had time to recover. The bison stopped just inside the basin. He lifted his head and breathed deeply through wide nostrils, drawing in air that carried dust, dry stems, and old animal presence. But no freshness, no green, no signal of renewal. This was early. Too early. The valley had been entered before, not by him alone. Others had come weeks ahead of schedule, driven by pressure elsewhere, drought on the plains, late snow in higher ground, competition that pushed timing forward without permission from the land itself. The valley had been taken before it was ready. The bison lowered his head and tested the ground. He tore at a clump of grass with his tongue and teeth, pulling free what little remained. He chewed slowly, methodically, extracting what energy he could. It was not enough, but it confirmed what his eyes already knew. The valley was behind its own season. He moved forward, not quickly. Distance did not change grass. He followed a shallow depression where water once lingered longest, where soil held moisture deeper beneath the surface. Sometimes green returned here first. Now it did not. The depression was trampled flat, its edges softened by repeated passage. Whatever shoots had emerged earlier were gone, removed before they could strengthen. The bison paused again. His ears turned, listening. There were no other bison nearby, no low grunts, no movement heavy enough to register through the ground. The herd had not followed yet. This entry was exploratory, not communal. That mattered. A lone bison could leave. A herd committed momentum the land might not absorb. The wind moved lightly through the valley, lifting dust but not cooling the ground. It carried no rain scent. Clouds lay thin and distant, undecided. The bison shifted his weight and continued deeper. Each step pressed memory into the soil, paths his species had walked for centuries, following cycles that once aligned closely with grass, water, and recovery. Those cycles still existed, but their margins had narrowed. The valley no longer corrected early arrival, it simply revealed it. At the far end of the basin, a narrow strip of darker earth hinted at moisture retained beneath shade. The bison angled toward it, conserving energy by keeping his pace slow and even. He was not searching for abundance. He was confirming absence. The grass was still gone. That did not mean the valley was useless, but it meant it could not hold many, and the bison, standing heavy and patient in a place that remembered being full, began to understand that this season would not be decided by where animals went, but by who arrived early enough to leave before the land was asked to give what it did not yet have. The valley changed before it filled. Sound arrived first, distant, low, irregular. Not voices, not calls, but the layered compression of movement carried through ground rather than air. The bison felt it through his legs long before he saw anything. Others were coming. They did not rush. Herds never did. They entered space the way weather did, gradually, without intention to overwhelm, yet inevitably changing everything once present. The first shapes appeared along the ridgeline to the north, dark against pale soil, then more, then the suggestion of mass rather than individual bodies. Heads low, shoulders high, movement slow but continuous. The bison stood still and waited. He did not move toward them. He did not retreat. At this moment, motion would not improve position. The valley would decide its capacity regardless of where he stood within it. The herd descended. Hooves pressed into the same shallow paths the lone bison had followed earlier, deepening them, widening them, flattening what little structure remained. Dust lifted and hung briefly, then settled back onto already pale ground. Grass disappeared again, not because it was taken, but because it was trampled beyond recognition. Stems broke at the base, soil loosened. What little green had tried to rise between passes was pressed back into the earth. The bison moved slowly to the side, not away, just aside. He positioned himself near a low rise where he could watch without being absorbed fully into the flow. Within the herd, decision dissolved. Movement became consensus. Leaving later would require friction. The herd spread, not evenly. They followed memory rather than observation, drifting toward places that had fed them in earlier seasons. The shallow stream bed, the shaded curve of the valley wall, the slight dip where snowmelt once lingered longer. None of those places held anything now. But absence did not stop mouths. Bison fed anyway. They tore at the ground, chewing steadily, drawing calories from dryness, wearing teeth against stems that resisted without rewarding. This was not panic feeding. It was habit, the expectation that effort would eventually be answered. The valley did not answer. Hours passed. Movement slowed. The herd bunched more tightly as options narrowed. Space compressed. Where individuals had once spread, they now overlapped, stepping into each other's paths, displacing soil faster than it could settle. The bison felt the pressure change. Not physical, informational. Too many bodies reading the same signals meant those signals lost clarity. Grass that might have supported a few could not sustain many. Water that might appear later would be fouled quickly. He lifted his head and tested the air. Still no rain. Still no green scent. This was the moment that mattered. Leaving early conserved strength. Leaving late meant leaving weakened, or not leaving at all. The herd had not yet committed fully. Some still drifted along the edges, uncertain, testing ground without urgency. But others had lowered heads deeply, anchoring themselves psychologically to the valley through feeding, however unproductive. The bison turned his body slightly toward the southern slope. It was not an exit, just a direction. He did not move yet. Leadership among bison was subtle. It did not announce itself. It happened through orientation, through small changes in posture that others noticed without acknowledging. The valley filled with weight, not abundance. Weight alone. And the bison, heavy and patient, understood that the land would not intervene. It would not fail dramatically. It would simply continue offering too little until strength turned into depletion. The question was no longer whether the grass would return, it was whether the herd would wait long enough to require it. The first fence did not look like a barrier. It ran low along the southern edge of the valley, following the contour rather than cutting across it. From a distance, it resembled nothing more than a line of posts, thin, regular, almost incidental against the openness of the land. The bison saw it only when he was close. Wire caught the light briefly, flashing once, then disappearing again as the angle changed. It was old wire, weathered and dull, but still tight enough to matter. It hummed faintly in the wind, a sound too thin to carry far, but sharp enough to be felt when near. The bison stopped. This had not been here before. At least, not in his memory. The valley's exits had always been gradual, slopes that widened, passes that narrowed but did not close, directions that thinned rather than stopped. This was different. This did not thin. It ended. Behind him, the herd continued to feed. Not actively, not efficiently, but persistently. Heads down, movement slow. No urgency yet strong enough to push bodies into decision. The bison turned and walked parallel to the fence. He did not test it immediately. Wire punished panic. It demanded understanding first. He followed its line, head lifted now, eyes scanning for breaks, dips, places where ground rose enough to render the barrier irrelevant. None appeared. The fence curved with the land, thoughtful in its placement. It guided movement rather than blocking it outright, nudging bodies back toward the center of the valley without ever confronting them directly. Further along, he found the gate, closed. Metal bars crossed the opening, reinforced, sunk deep into soil that had been compacted by machines rather than hooves. The smell here was different. Oil, rust, old human presence layered over dust and grass. Humans had planned this, not recently, but deliberately. The bison stood still for a long time. Beyond the gate, land rose gently into scrub where grass might recover sooner, where movement could spread instead of compress. The difference was visible even from here. Darker soil, scattered green that had not yet been taken. But it was unreachable. He turned back toward the valley. Now the herd was closer, not because it had followed him, but because space had collapsed inward. Bodies drifted, pressure redistributed, the center growing heavier as the edges closed. Another fence lay to the east, and another to the west. Not continuous, but overlapping enough to define shape. The valley had become a container rather than a corridor. The bison felt the change settle. This was no longer a place to pass through slowly, correcting timing along the way. This was a place that required decision before energy ran out, and it did not offer many directions in which that decision could be made. He moved back into the herd, not to disappear, to influence. He angled his body again toward the southern slope, closer to the fence than before, walking with intention but not force. A few others lifted their heads briefly, registering orientation rather than reasoning. The herd shifted slightly, not enough. The grass beneath them continued to thin, not because it was eaten, but because it was being asked to exist under constant weight without time. The bison stopped once more and stood tall, head raised above the moving backs around him. From here he could see the full outline of the valley, its width, its limits, its promise delayed beyond the fences that now defined it. Leaving was still possible. But it was no longer easy, and waiting had become expensive. The valley remained quiet. No rain arrived. No new green pushed through. And the bison, surrounded by weight in a place that could not yet carry it, understood that the most dangerous part of early arrival was not hunger alone, but discovering too late that the land no longer allowed simple departure. The herd did not move all at once. It never did. Change came through hesitation first, longer pauses between steps, heads lifting more often, bodies turning without committing. Feeding continued, but without rhythm. Effort increased while return diminished. The valley began to show it. Dust hung longer in the air, bare soil widened where hooves passed repeatedly. What little grass remained lost colour entirely, shifting from pale green to grey, then to nothing that could be called living. The bison felt weakness arrive quietly, not collapse, drag. Each step required more intention. Muscles warmed slower. Recovery took longer. This was not starvation yet. It was the beginning of imbalance. At dawn on the fourth day, movement finally changed. A small group near the southern edge turned as one and began walking parallel to the fence, not pressing it, following it, searching for what the bison had already confirmed did not exist. But persistence mattered. Pressure accumulated along the wire. Hooves churned soil near posts. The ground softened slightly from repeated contact, not enough to break the barrier, but enough to reveal a low point where erosion had lowered the fence's effective height by a fraction. It was barely noticeable, but for animals built to read ground, it was enough. One young bison pushed through first, not forcefully, awkwardly. The wire scraped along his shoulder and back, hair catching, skin tightening. He hesitated, then surged forward as weight behind him increased. The fence flexed. It did not fail, but it gave enough. Another followed, then another. The opening widened not by design, but by insistence. Wire stretched, posts leaned, soil loosened further under repeated pressure. The bison moved, not rushing, choosing. He angled toward the breach, body heavy but steady, and passed through where the ground no longer resisted completely. The wire brushed his flank, biting briefly, then releasing. Beyond the fence, the land opened. Not lush, but rested. Grass stood taller here, thin but alive. The soil smelled different, cooler, holding moisture deeper down. Movement spread instead of compressing. Only part of the herd followed. Others remained behind, delayed by hesitation, by injury, by the inability to reach the opening in time before pressure redistributed again. The fence held after that, not repaired, but stabilized by lack of force. The valley kept them. Those who crossed did not look back. Bison rarely did. They moved upslope and outward, spreading weight across ground that could absorb it better, grazing lightly, conserving strength. Behind them, the valley settled into a different quiet. Fewer bodies moved. Dust fell. What grass remained was pressed flat beyond recovery for this season. The fences stood, unchanged in appearance, having altered outcome without ever seeming dramatic. Rain would come later. It always did. But timing mattered. When it arrived, it would find a valley already spent, roots weakened, soil compacted beyond easy repair. Recovery would take longer now. The bison continued on. He did not carry relief. He carried momentum. The valley had offered memory, not food. It had accepted weight before it was ready and kept what could not leave. The grass had still been gone. And the season would remember that long after the herd moved on.